Normandy, 1944. German prisoners are being marched behind the American lines. They've seen burning tanks, abandoned guns, and their own dead left where they fell. Then they turn a corner, and what they see stops the columns' murmur cold. A field of white crosses, hundreds of them, in rows so straight they look drawn with a ruler. Fresh graves, everyone marked, everyone recorded, and this is the part the prisoners couldn't process, dug and tended while the battle for Normandy was still being fought, a few miles up that same road. German officers wrote about it. Interrogators noted it, over and over in the reports. Of all the things that shocked the men who fought the Americans, the shells, the trucks, the food, the thing many of them mentioned first was this. The Americans buried their dead like the war was already won, like every single man was going home, one way or the other. They were seeing the visible edge of a promise, and tonight's file is about the men who kept it, because someone had to dig those graves, record those names, and answer to every mother in America. This is the story of the soldiers whose job was the dead. Stay with me, because it ends in a small town in Holland, where 80 years later, that promise is still being kept by people who never met the men they keep it for. Start on Omaha Beach, the second day. The fighting has moved inland, and onto that beach come soldiers with a job most men couldn't do for a single hour. Graves registration, a branch of the Quartermaster Corps, the same corps that moved the rations and the fuel, because the army filed the dead, bluntly, under logistics. Their orders on that beach were simple to write and unimaginable to carry out. Recover every fallen American, identify him, record him, bury him with honor, begin at the waterline. Picture what the job actually was, hour by hour, working through wreckage under intermittent fire, carrying men to collection points, checking the 2 dog tags every soldier wore. One stays with the man, one stays with the grave, so that no cross would ever stand over a question mark. Going through pockets for the personal effects, the letters, the photographs, the watch, each man's belongings bagged, tagged, and started on their long paper journey back to a family that didn't know yet. And when there were no tags, and on a beach swept by machine gun fire, there often weren't. They became detectives. Fingerprints, dental records, laundry marks on a collar, a name written inside a boot. Graves registration men were forbidden, by their own rules, from guessing. An unknown stayed unknown until the evidence said otherwise, because a wrong name on a grave was a lie told to 2 families at once. The men who did this work were not hardened specialists. There was no such thing. They were quartermaster soldiers, many of them young, handed the worst job in the army and a field manual. Veterans of the Graves unit spoke about it. Decades later, the way other men spoke of combat. The smell that never leaves, the wallets they had to open, because inside every wallet was a photograph, and the photograph made the man on the stretcher a person again, somebody's son, just as they zipped the bag. Some broke and were reassigned. Most stayed, because they'd worked out what the job actually was, not handling the dead, answering for them. Within days of the landings, the first temporary American cemeteries in France were laid out in the fields above the beaches, not after the campaign, during it. Survey stakes and string, rows measured out, every grave numbered and mapped, every map copied to Washington. Men dug graves in the morning and took cover from artillery in the afternoon. The war moved east, and the cemeteries followed it. France, Belgium, Holland, Germany, dozens of temporary burial grounds, each one plotted like a town. There is no monument to most of these men. They didn't take ground. What they took was responsibility for the single hardest promise an army can make. Because here's the thing the prisoners on that road couldn't have known. What they were looking at wasn't improvised decency. It was a system, one America had been building for a generation. It started with a question no army before had really tried to answer at scale. What does a country owe the family of a soldier who doesn't come home? In 1917, when America entered the First World War, the Army founded the Graves Registration Service to give that question a working answer, and put a quartermaster officer named Charles Pierce in charge of building it. Pierce had spent years of his life on exactly this problem. He'd run the Army's burial office in the Philippines decades earlier, and he'd come away convinced of something radical for his time, that identifying and accounting for every single dead soldier wasn't sentimentality. It was a debt. Under Pierce, The answer became a working system, every fallen American accounted for. A name, a place, a record, and after the war, a choice. And the choice was real, even then. After the First World War, tens of thousands of American families brought their sons home from France, while tens of thousands more chose the new American cemeteries overseas. So when the Second World War came, and the dying started on a scale 10 times larger, the machine already existed. It just had to grow to meet the largest promise ever made. That last part is the piece with no real equal anywhere. When the Second World War ended, the United States government wrote to the next of kin of its dead, hundreds of thousands of letters, and asked each family to decide. Bring him home, at government expense, to any cemetery in America you choose, or let him rest where he fell, among the men he served with, in ground the nation would tend forever. Here's what that meant in practice. Because Graves' registration had to deliver it. The American dead came home from overseas in the years after the war. A fleet of white-painted mortuary ships, honor guards at the docks, a flag-draped casket arriving in thousands of small towns. Roughly 171,000 men, each one delivered to the cemetery his family chose. And tens of thousands of families chose the other answer. Some 93,000 sons stayed, gathered from the temporary battlefield cemeteries into permanent ones. The great marble fields at Normandy, in Belgium, in Italy, in Holland, where every headstone was set in perfect alignment and the grass would be cut by American care in perpetuity. Here's what keeping that promise looked like when the bill came due. In October 1947, a ship called the Joseph V. Connolly sailed into New York Harbor, carrying the first 6,000 of the war dead home from Europe. One casket, chosen at random to stand for all of them, was carried up Fifth Avenue on a caisson, while hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers lined the route in silence. Grown men wept openly on the sidewalks. That scene repeated, at smaller scale, in railway stations and church halls across America for years. A flag-draped casket, an honor guard, a family finally able to stand at a grave. Every one of those homecomings had begun with a man in a muddy field in 1944, writing a name on a form and refusing to get it wrong. Every one of those decisions ran on the records made by tired men with clipboards, often within earshot of the guns. That's what the paperwork was for. Not bureaucracy. Memory, made permanent, with a filing system behind it. And the system's reach went further than the prisoners knew, because on those same days in Normandy, Graves' registration units were burying German dead too. Marked, recorded, mapped, reported. The enemy's fallen given graves and paperwork by the army they had been shooting at that morning. Some of the ground where Germany's war dead rest in France today was first laid out, plot by plot, by American Graves men in 1944. The promise, it turned out, wasn't only for their own. Now put yourself back in that prisoner column, because the shock makes more sense once you know what those men were comparing it to. The Wehrmacht of 1944 was an army in collapse, and one of the first things that collapses with an army is its care for its dead. Early in the war, German units had buried their fallen with ceremony. The photographs exist, the birch crosses, the helmets on the graves. By the retreats of 1944, that world was gone. The dead were left behind with the ground they died holding. A soldier's identity disc snapped in half, one half buried with him if anyone had time, one half sent up a chain of paperwork that, by then, was burning faster than it could be filed. Families in Germany got silence, or a form letter years late, or nothing at all. To this day, German organizations are still finding and reburying their war dead from that collapse. Tens of thousands of families who never got the answer. American families got by mail in 1947. So when a captured German officer stood at the fence of an American temporary cemetery and watched a chaplain conduct burials, individual burials with a record made of each, while artillery was still audible, he wasn't just seeing tidiness, he was seeing an army that had budgeted for its own grief. An army so certain of its systems, so deep in resources and intention, that it could afford to treat every private's death as an event that would be answered for. The interrogation summaries kept circling the same reaction, and it's worth saying plainly, it frightened them. Propaganda had told them Americans were soft, a mongrel nation of shopkeepers that would fold at the first hard winter. Softness doesn't survey cemeteries under shellfire. The white crosses said the same thing the endless truck columns said, the same thing the artillery said, but in a language every soldier understood personally. These people intend to finish this, and they intend to go home. All of them, one way or the other. More than one prisoner report said some version of the same sentence. A country that does this for its dead cannot be beaten by us. Which brings us to a village in the far south of the Netherlands, and the part of this story that nobody planned. In the autumn of 1944, the American Ninth Army was fighting its way toward Germany, and Graves' registration laid out another cemetery in the file, a stretch of Dutch farmland outside a village called Margraten. Through that terrible winter and the spring of 1945, the burials came by the truckload, the dead of the drive into Germany, of the Bulge fighting to the south, of the air war overhead. By the end, there were more than 17,000 Americans in that field. The men doing the burying worked through Dutch mud so heavy it swallowed the trucks. Villagers watched it happen, day after day, row after row of strangers who had died freeing them. And then the village did something that had no precedent, no order behind it, no committee in Washington. They started adopting the graves. A local civic committee formed in 1945 with a simple idea: every American in that field should have someone. A family from Margraten, or the villages around it, would take a grave, one soldier, by name, and care for it. Visit it. Lay flowers on his birthday and on the day he died. Find out who he was. Write to his mother in Ohio or Texas or Brooklyn so that an American family 4,000 miles away would know. Someone here knows your son's name. Someone here will stand at his grave when you cannot. By the spring of 1946, every grave had a family, all of them. And when, in the years after, thousands of those men were repatriated home at their families' request, the adoption didn't fade with the smaller cemetery. It hardened into an institution. Today, Margraten, the Netherlands-American cemetery, holds over 8,000 graves and a wall bearing more than 1,700 names of the missing. Every grave and every name on that wall is adopted. There is a waiting list. Dutch parents pass graves to their children like an inheritance. There are families now on their third and fourth generation of caring for the same American soldier. And in recent years, the community set itself one more task: finding the faces. Volunteers spent years hunting down photographs of the men, writing to American families, digging through school yearbooks and small-town newspaper archives across the ocean, so that on Memorial Days, a photograph stands at each grave and each name on the wall of the missing. Thousands of young faces, looking back across 80 years at the Dutch families who never let go of them. They call it the Faces of Margraten, and there are still volunteers, right now, working to find the last few hundred photographs. Nobody ordered this. No treaty requires it. It's simply what happened when one small country looked closely at the promise those graves registration men had carved into their farmland, and decided to join it. Go back one last time to that column of prisoners on the Normandy road, staring at the white crosses. They thought they were looking at American wealth. Some of them wrote that it was American arrogance. The ones who understood it best wrote that it was the moment they knew the war was lost. But the real answer was simpler than any of that. They were looking at an army that wrote down its dead. Because a country that writes down its dead is a country that intends to answer for every one of them. To a mother, in 1947, choosing where her son would rest. To a Dutch child, laying flowers for a man she never met. To us, 80 years on, reading the names. The men of Graves' registration got no parades, but every white cross standing in perfect alignment from Normandy to Margraten is their handwriting. And the record is why we know the names. Before you go, I've got a question for you. Did anyone in your family serve? Tell me about them in the comments. A name, a unit, a story handed down. These files only survive because people take the time to tell them. And if you've stayed this long, 3 small things help keep this channel going. If you haven't liked the video, it takes a second, and it goes a long way toward putting this story in front of the people who'd want it most. Subscribe, so you don't miss the next file. I open one every week. And share this one with someone who'd enjoy it. Until next time, take care.